There's something uniquely vulnerable about moments when the world watches as one. Global events, the Olympics, major sporting championships, international summits, create perfect storms of opportunity for those who would exploit our collective attention. When billions of eyes focus on a single location, when security resources stretch to their absolute limits, when the pressure to maintain perfect appearances overrides normal caution, the stage is set for catastrophes that could reshape history. During my investigations into unexplained phenomena, I've discovered that some of the most critical premonitions occur during these massive public gatherings. Perhaps it's the sheer scale of potential consequences that amplifies our intuitive warning systems. Perhaps the intense pressure and heightened emotions of global events make us more sensitive to subtle signals of danger. Or perhaps those who would do harm understand that the biggest stages offer the biggest impact. Today I share two accounts from individuals who experienced premonitions during events that captivated worldwide attention. Both detected threats that had nothing to do with accidents or natural disasters, but with carefully orchestrated human malice designed to exploit the chaos and distraction of global spectacle. The first comes from Carlos Mendoza, an Olympic sprinter who experienced disturbing visions during what should have been the culminating moment of his athletic career. The second, from Frank Sullivan, head of security at the Bellagio resort in Las Vegas, who sensed something wrong during the city's biggest international poker championship, an event that draws high-stakes players and massive money transfers from around the world. These testimonies were recorded separately, in secure locations far from the glittering venues they describe. Both individuals still work in their respective fields, but both carry the weight of knowledge about how quickly celebration can turn to tragedy when human predators use our moments of joy as cover for unthinkable acts. What makes their stories particularly unsettling is how their premonitions revealed the vulnerability hidden within our most secure and celebrated gatherings. The very factors that make global events special, the crowds, the media attention, the complex logistics, also make them perfect targets for those who understand that chaos is the ideal environment for achieving terrible goals. Listen to these accounts and consider, in our interconnected world, where global events are broadcast to billions and security seems omnipresent, are we actually more vulnerable than ever? When everyone is watching the stage, who's watching the shadows? Story 1. The Olympian's Vision. Account of Carlos Mendoza, 29 years old, Olympic sprinter. My name is Carlos Mendoza, and I should have been living my dream during the Paris Olympics. After 12 years of training, I finally qualified for the men's 100-meter dash, the most prestigious race in all of sports. The opening ceremony was supposed to be the beginning of my moment on the world stage. Instead, it became the night I saw death hiding in plain sight among 80,000 spectators. The vision came to me during the final rehearsal, 3 days before the ceremony. I was in the athlete staging area beneath the Stade de France, waiting with my teammates for our cue to enter the Parade of Nations. Everything was choreographed to the second, 10,000 athletes from 206 countries, each group timed to enter the stadium at precisely the right moment for maximum television impact. I was stretching, trying to stay loose in the cramped staging area, when suddenly I wasn't there anymore. I was standing in the middle of the stadium track, but it was during the actual ceremony, not the rehearsal. The stadium was packed with spectators, all 80,000 seats filled with people waving flags and cheering. The opening spectacle was in full swing. Dancers, light shows, the massive screens displaying images of French history and culture. But in my vision, I could see something the crowds couldn't. A man in section 127, upper deck, third row. He was wearing a blue jacket and a white baseball cap, and he was assembling something small and metallic in his lap. His movements were calm, methodical, like someone following memorized instructions. I tried to focus on his face, but every time I looked directly at him, the vision would shift. I could see his hands, his clothes, his exact location, but his features remained frustratingly blurred. What I could see clearly was what he was building, a small device with wires, a digital timer, and what looked like blocks of clay-colored material. The vision lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like hours. When I snapped back to reality, I was sitting on the floor of the staging area with my teammate Jake Martinez shaking my shoulder. "Carlos, you okay, man? You just zoned out completely." I couldn't tell him what I'd seen. How do you explain that you've just witnessed a terrorist attack that hasn't happened yet? How do you describe seeing a bomb being assembled in a stadium that's currently empty? Just nerves, I said. Big moment, you know. But it wasn't nerves. I'd competed in world championships, Diamond League meets, and pressure situations that would break most people. I knew the difference between pre-competition anxiety and whatever had just happened to me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man in section 127, calmly working on his device while 80,000 people cheered around him. I could see the exact seat, row C, seat 18. I could describe his clothes down to the brand logo on his cap, but I couldn't see his face or predict when he planned to detonate whatever he was building. The next morning, I did something that could have ended my Olympic career before it started. I called stadium security. "This is Carlos Mendoza. I'm competing in the 100 meters. I need to report a potential security threat for the opening ceremony." The security coordinator, a former French military officer named Captain Rousseau, was professional but skeptical. "What type of threat are you reporting, Mr. Mendoza?" "There's going to be a man in section 127, row C, seat 18, carrying explosive materials during the ceremony." "How do you know this?" I couldn't tell him about the vision. International Olympic Committee protocols don't include procedures for handling psychic warnings from athletes. "I overheard a conversation," I lied. "Someone talking about targeting that specific section during the ceremony." "Can you describe the individuals involved in this conversation?" "One man, wearing a blue jacket and white baseball cap." I didn't get a clear look at his face. Captain Rousseau was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Mendoza, are you, aware that making false reports about Olympic security is a serious crime?" "I'm not making a false report. I'm telling you what I heard." "And where did this conversation allegedly take place?" I was trapped. I couldn't provide details about a conversation that had never happened, based on a vision that made no sense. "Look, I know how this sounds, but I'm asking you to check that seat during the ceremony. That's all. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But if I'm right," another pause. "Mr. Mendoza, we receive dozens of unsubstantiated threat reports every day during the Olympics. Our security protocols are comprehensive. Every person entering the stadium will be screened, and we have surveillance on every section." "But will you specifically watch section 127? "We watch every section, Mr. Mendoza. That's our job." But I knew they wouldn't pay special attention to that seat. Why would they? One athlete's vague report about an overheard conversation wasn't enough to justify enhanced surveillance of a specific location. The day of the opening ceremony, I was a wreck. During the athlete parade, I kept looking up at section 127, trying to spot the man from my vision among the thousands of spectators. The ceremonies were spectacular. France had put on an incredible show celebrating their culture and Olympic history, but I couldn't focus on any of it. At 9:47 p.m. during the lighting of the Olympic flame, I saw him. Section 127, row C, seat 18. Blue, jacket, white baseball cap, exactly as I'd seen in the vision 3 days earlier. He was sitting calmly among the cheering spectators, but his hands were moving in his lap in the same methodical way I'd witnessed. I was in the athlete seating area on the stadium floor, maybe 200 yards away from section 127. Too far to do anything, too far even to clearly see what he was doing. But I knew. I grabbed my phone and called Captain Rousseau's direct line. "This is Carlos Mendoza, the man I told you about. He's there. Section 127, row C, seat 18. Right now. Mr. Mendoza, you're supposed to be participating in the ceremony. He's assembling a device. You need to get security to that section immediately. How can you possibly see someone assembling anything from your position on the stadium floor?" He was right. It was impossible. But I could see it anyway. Not with my eyes, but with the same inexplicable clarity that had shown me the vision in the first place. "Just send someone to check, please." 5 minutes later, I watched through binoculars borrowed from a photographer as 3 security officers approached section 127. They moved casually, trying not to create a disturbance among the spectators. One officer sat down next to the man in the blue jacket and struck up what appeared to be a friendly conversation. That's when everything went wrong. The man stood up suddenly, pushing past other spectators toward the aisle. He wasn't running. That would have attracted too much attention. But he was moving with obvious urgency. The security officers followed, trying to maintain the appearance of casual contact. At the top of the aisle, the man broke into a run. What happened next unfolded in slow motion. The man reached into his jacket as he ran, pulling out what looked like a cell phone. The security officers shouted something I couldn't hear over the ceremony noise and drew their weapons. The man pressed something on the device he was holding. For a moment, nothing happened. Then there was a flash of light from Section 127, followed by a sound like thunder, echoing through the stadium. Not a massive explosion, more like a large firecracker, but enough to send spectators screaming and rushing toward the exits. The opening ceremony ground to a halt as emergency protocols kicked in. The stadium lights came up, emergency announcements began broadcasting in multiple languages, and security teams swarmed toward Section 127. But there was no catastrophic explosion, no mass casualties, no terrorist victory broadcast to billions of viewers worldwide. The investigation revealed that the man, later identified as Ahmed Qasim, a member of a radical cell operating out of Belgium, had been building a much larger device. The small explosion that occurred was from a partially completed backup detonator that he'd triggered when he realized security was closing in. The main bomb, discovered later in a bag he'd left under his seat, contained enough explosives to kill everyone within a 50-foot radius and cause a panic that could have led to hundreds of deaths in the stampede toward exits. But because security had been alerted to his exact location, they'd interrupted his work before he could complete the assembly. The device that exploded was maybe 10% of what he'd intended to detonate. Captain Rousseau called me the next morning. "Mr. Mendoza, I owe you an apology, and possibly the Olympic Committee owes you a medal for something other than running." "How did you know?" he asked. "Even with surveillance footage, we can't figure out how you identified that specific threat in that specific location." I couldn't tell him the truth. The IOC drug testing program doesn't include screening for psychic abilities, but I suspected that claiming to have prophetic visions might raise other questions about my mental fitness to compete. Sometimes you just know when something's wrong, I said. The Olympics continued after a one-day delay for additional security sweeps. I ran my 100-meter race and finished 6th, not the medal I'd dreamed of, but respectable for someone who'd spent the previous week dealing with terrorist plots instead of focusing on training. The media never learned about my role in preventing the attack. The official story was that security had detected suspicious behavior through routine surveillance. Ahmed Qasim was quietly prosecuted, and the incident was downplayed to avoid copycat attacks or damage to Olympic security credibility. But I know what really happened. And more importantly, I know what would have happened if I hadn't trusted a vision that made no logical sense. Since Paris, I've competed in 3 more international meets, but I've never experienced another premonition like that. It was as if the stakes of the moment, 80,000 people in the stadium, billions watching worldwide, had somehow amplified my ability to detect danger. Or maybe threats to that many innocent people just register differently in whatever part of our consciousness can see things before they happen. I'm retiring from competitive running after this season. The constant travel, the pressure, the knowledge that any major event could be a target. It's changed how I see the sporting world. What used to feel like pure competition now feels like elaborate targets for people who want to hurt as many others as possible. But I'll always be grateful that I trusted my instincts that night in Paris. Even if I couldn't save everyone, even if the bomb still partially exploded, I helped prevent a massacre during what should have been a celebration of human achievement. Sometimes being a hero isn't about stopping every bad thing from happening. Sometimes it's about making the bad things smaller, more manageable, less catastrophic. Sometimes a partial victory is the best victory you can hope for. Have you ever felt responsible for protecting people during a moment when the whole world was watching? Have you ever sensed danger in a situation where everyone else only saw celebration and joy? Carlos's experience demonstrates how global events create unique vulnerabilities that our normal threat detection systems may not recognize. But what happens when that same intuitive warning operates in environments specifically designed to detect deception and criminal intent? What happens when premonitions target threats that exploit not just security gaps, but the very systems designed to prevent them? Story 2. The security chief's intuition account of Frank Sullivan, 51 years old, casino security director. My name is Frank Sullivan, and I've spent 28 years in casino security, the last 12 as director of surveillance and protection at the Bellagio Resort in Las Vegas. I've seen every scam, every con, every angle that criminals use to separate casinos from their money. I thought I understood every possible threat to my property. I was wrong about the ones that disguise themselves as accidents. The incident occurred during the World Series of Poker Championship, the biggest poker tournament in the world. For 2 weeks, the Bellagio hosts players from every country, with prize pools reaching 50 million and side games running 24/7 with millions more in cash and chips in play. It's the highest concentration gambling event on the planet, and that makes it a target for the most sophisticated criminal organizations. But the threat I sensed wasn't coming from the poker players. It was coming from the people we trusted to keep the lights on. The Premonitions started during a routine security briefing on day 8 of the tournament. I was reviewing surveillance footage from the previous night, standard procedure to identify any unusual patterns or potential threats, when I noticed something that shouldn't have. Bothered me, but did. A maintenance worker had accessed the main electrical panel in the basement utilities area at 3:22 a.m. According to the logs, he was performing scheduled maintenance on backup power systems. The work was authorized, the worker was properly credentialed, and the maintenance was completed without incident. But something about the footage made my skin crawl. I'd been watching casino surveillance cameras for nearly 3 decades. You develop an instinct for spotting behavior that doesn't match stated intentions. Thieves move differently than gamblers. Scam artists have different body language than tourists. Cheaters have tells that honest players don't display. This maintenance worker moved like a thief. He worked too quickly, too efficiently, like someone who knew exactly what he was looking for and where to find it. He spent precisely 11 minutes at the electrical panel, long enough to complete legitimate maintenance, but also long enough to install something that shouldn't be there. Most concerning, he kept checking his watch and looking toward the camera, not with the nervousness of someone doing something wrong, but with the timing awareness of someone coordinating with others. I pulled his employment records. David Chen, 34 years old, licensed electrician, employed by Hartwell Maintenance Services for 6 years. Clean background check, no criminal history, consistently positive performance reviews. On paper, he was exactly the kind of reliable contractor we depended on for critical infrastructure maintenance. But my gut was telling me David Chen was planning something. The problem with casino security is that you can't act on hunches. Every decision has to be justified with evidence, documentation, and clear procedural grounds. If I restricted Chen's access based on nothing more than a feeling about his body language, I'd be setting a precedent for arbitrary security decisions that could paralyze our operations. But I couldn't shake the certainty that he was a threat. That afternoon, I requested a complete audit of all electrical work performed by Chen during his 6 years of employment. What I found was disturbing in its very perfection. Chen's work record was flawless. Every job completed on time. Every safety protocol followed precisely. Every maintenance log filled out with meticulous detail. It was too perfect. In 28 years of working with contractors, I'd never seen a maintenance record without a single anomaly, delay, or minor violation. Chen's employment history read like it had been constructed to pass exactly the kind of scrutiny I was giving it. I called Jim Hartwell, owner of the maintenance company. "Jim, I need to ask you about David Chen. How well do you know him?" "David, he's one of my best guys." "Why? Is there a problem?" "No problem. Just routine background verification." "How did you recruit him?" "He came to us about 6 years ago with excellent references from a company in Detroit. Licensed electrician, specialized in casino and hospitality electrical systems. Exactly what we needed for the Vegas contracts." "Have you ever had any concerns about his work or behavior?" "Never. David's completely reliable. Shows up on time, finishes his jobs, never causes problems." "Why are you asking?" I couldn't tell him I suspected his model employee of planning some kind of electrical sabotage based on nothing more than the way he'd moved during routine maintenance. "Just updating our contractor security files." "Thanks, Jim." But Jim's description of Chen as completely reliable only reinforced my concerns. In my experience, people who never cause any problems are often the ones causing the biggest problems in ways you haven't detected yet. That evening, I assigned additional surveillance to Chen's activities. Discreetly, using cameras he wouldn't know were focused on him, we began monitoring his every move during his scheduled shifts. For 3 days, Chen performed his duties exactly as he always had. Professional, efficient, unremarkable. If anything, the enhanced surveillance made his behavior appear even more normal. But on the 4th night, something changed. Chen arrived for his regular midnight shift, but instead of proceeding directly to his assigned maintenance areas, he made a detour to the security office. He spoke briefly with the night supervisor, showed him some paperwork, and then continued to the basement utilities area. I called the night supervisor. What did Chen want? Routine notification. He's scheduled to perform some electrical testing that might cause brief power fluctuations. Wanted to make sure we weren't surprised if lights flickered. What kind of testing? Load balancing on the backup generators. Standard monthly procedure. But I checked the maintenance schedule. Chen's load balancing test wasn't due for another 2 weeks. That's when the pieces clicked together. Chen wasn't planning to steal money or chips. He was planning to create a controlled power outage that would appear to be routine maintenance, but would actually provide cover for a much larger operation. During a power outage, even a brief one, casino security systems default to backup modes. Camera coverage is reduced, alarm systems are temporarily bypassed, and security personnel focus on maintaining order rather than surveillance. For maybe 90 seconds, the Bellagio would be more vulnerable than it had been since opening day. 90 seconds is plenty of time for a coordinated team to steal millions in cash and chips if they know exactly where to strike and exactly when the security gaps will occur. I immediately called for emergency backup from Metro Police and ordered all available security personnel to strategic positions throughout the casino. But I couldn't explain why I was convinced an attack was coming. I had no evidence of criminal intent, no proof of conspiracy, just a maintenance worker doing apparently legitimate electrical work. At 12:47 a.m., Chen initiated his load balancing test. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely for exactly 93 seconds. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, but the main surveillance system switched to backup mode just as I'd predicted. During those 93 seconds, 4 things happened simultaneously. A team of 3 men rushed the high-stakes cash game room on the 2nd floor, where approximately $3.2 million in chips and cash was in play. They moved with military precision, knew exactly which players were carrying the most money, and had escape routes mapped down to the second. A second team targeted the main cashier cage on the casino floor, using insider knowledge of exactly when the vault would be accessible during the power transition. A third individual accessed the poker tournament area, where the championship prize pool was being held in a secure but temporarily unmonitored location. The fourth component was Chen himself, who used the confusion to access the main security server room and attempt to download surveillance footage and security protocols. But because I'd positioned extra personnel in all these areas based on nothing more than my inexplicable certainty that something was wrong, we caught all 4 elements of the operation. The robbery teams found themselves facing twice the security they'd planned for. Chen discovered that his server access had been blocked, and additional IT security was monitoring his activities. The entire operation collapsed within minutes because they'd planned for normal security conditions during a routine power outage, not enhanced surveillance triggered by a security director's paranoid hunch. The investigation revealed that Chen had been recruited 6 years earlier, specifically to establish credibility as a trusted maintenance contractor. His entire employment history, his perfect work record, his spotless background, it had all been constructed to position him for this one job. The robbery was planned to coincide with the poker championship, because that was when the maximum amount of cash and chips would be concentrated in the smallest area, with the highest level of distraction from the tournament activities. Chen's role was to create the security gap, but also to gather intelligence about our surveillance systems, security protocols, and response procedures. For 6 years, he'd been studying our vulnerabilities while maintaining perfect cover as a reliable employee. It was the most sophisticated inside job in Las Vegas history, planned with the kind of patience and attention to detail that would have made it virtually undetectable if executed successfully. But it failed. because I'd trusted a feeling I couldn't explain or justify. The arrest netted 7 conspirators and prevented the theft of approximately $8.4 million. Chen and his associates were prosecuted under federal racketeering statutes and received sentences ranging from 12 to 25 years. The media coverage focused on the sophisticated planning and the multi-year infiltration strategy. Nobody mentioned that the operation was detected by a security director who'd simply felt that something was wrong with routine maintenance footage. But the casino industry learned important lessons from the incident. Background checks now include psychological profiling to detect individuals who might be too perfect to be genuine. Maintenance schedules are randomized to prevent timing-based attacks. Power outage procedures have been redesigned to maintain full security capability even during electrical transitions. Since the Chen incident, I've detected 3 more potential inside threats based on similar intuitive concerns about employee behavior.
Each case extended investigation revealed legitimate security issues that weren't obvious from standard monitoring procedures. I've learned to trust my instincts about people, especially people who seem too good to be true. In casino security, paranoia isn't a character flaw. It's a professional requirement. But the Chen case taught me something deeper about criminal planning. The most dangerous threats aren't the obvious ones you can detect with cameras and procedures. They're the
ones that use your own systems and trust against you, planned by people patient enough to spend years establishing credibility before striking. The scariest part? If I hadn't felt that inexplicable wrongness about Chen's body language during routine maintenance, the robbery would have succeeded perfectly. We would have lost millions of dollars and never known it was an inside job until Chen and his team were long gone. Sometimes the difference between security and catastrophe is one person trusting a feeling that makes no sense to anyone else. Have you ever known someone was lying to you, even when their story was perfect? Have you ever sensed that a routine situation was actually a setup for something terrible, even when every logical indicator suggested normalcy? 2 professionals responsible for protecting thousands of people during moments of global attention. 2 instances where intuitive warnings detected threats that sophisticated security systems had missed. Carlos Mendoza saw a terrorist attack developing in the midst of Olympic celebration and prevented a massacre despite incomplete information. Frank Sullivan sensed criminal intent hiding within years of perfect employee behavior and stopped the most sophisticated casino heist in Las Vegas history. What strikes me most about these accounts is how both individuals had to act on premonitions that contradicted everything their professional training taught them to trust. Carlos received visions that provided specific details about a threat that hadn't yet materialized. Frank detected deception in behavior that appeared flawless to every monitoring system at his disposal. Both cases reveal a disturbing truth about security in our interconnected world. The very factors that make global events secure also make them vulnerable to those who understand how to exploit our protective systems. During my follow-up interviews, I discovered that both men experienced lasting changes in how they approach their professional responsibilities. Carlos described developing an almost supernatural awareness of crowd dynamics and potential threats during public events. Frank mentioned that he now evaluates employee behavior through intuitive filters that have proven more reliable than psychological assessments and background checks. Perhaps this is what premonitions represent in high-stakes environments: enhanced pattern recognition that operates beyond conscious analysis, detecting threats that are too sophisticated for standard security protocols to identify. But there's a more unsettling aspect to both stories. In each case, the premonition wasn't just about preventing immediate damage, but about detecting long-term strategic threats that had been developing for years. Carlos's vision revealed not just a bomb, but a terrorist cell that had been planning the Olympic attack for over 2 years. Frank's intuition exposed not just a robbery attempt, but a 6-year infiltration operation designed to compromise casino security from within. This suggests that premonitions during global events may be detecting not just immediate dangers, but entire networks of malicious intent that have been building toward moments of maximum impact. 6 months after these interviews, I researched other cases of intuitive threat detection during major public gatherings. I found accounts of security personnel who sensed danger at my political conventions, Super Bowl games, New Year's celebrations, and international summits. All events where millions of people watch and security resources are stretched to their limits. In every case, the premonitions led to the discovery of sophisticated threats that had been planned specifically to exploit the unique vulnerabilities of global events. This pattern suggests that as our world becomes more connected and our gatherings become larger and more complex, we may be creating environments that attract threats beyond the scope of traditional security planning. The most significant discovery in my research was how both premonitions led to systemic improvements in security protocols. Carlos's warning about specific seating areas resulted in enhanced surveillance of spectator sections during Olympic events. Frank's detection of the maintenance infiltration led to industry-wide changes in contractor background screening and power outage procedures. In both cases, trusting seemingly irrational warnings produced rational security improvements that protected future events from similar threats. But the most haunting aspect of both stories is how close each came to catastrophic failure, despite the warnings. Carlos prevented a massacre but couldn't stop the explosion entirely. Frank stopped a multi-million-dollar heist, but only because he'd acted on suspicions that he couldn't rationally justify. This raises fundamental questions about security in the age of global events. Are our protective systems sophisticated enough to detect threats that are planned with equal sophistication? Or do we need to incorporate forms of threat assessment that go beyond logical analysis? Perhaps the real lesson from these accounts is that in a world where millions of people gather to celebrate shared experiences, our security depends not just on technology and procedures, but on individuals who are willing to trust warnings that make no sense to anyone else. The alternative, waiting for logical confirmation of threats designed to exploit the gaps in logical security, may mean accepting that some attacks will succeed simply because they're too well planned to detect through conventional means. But the most disturbing discovery in my research was the pattern of escalation in both cases. The Olympic bomb was designed to kill hundreds and traumatize billions of viewers worldwide. The casino heist was planned to steal millions while destroying confidence in Las Vegas security. Both threats targeted not just immediate victims, but the institutions and experiences that bring people together in shared celebration and excitement. This suggests that those who would exploit global events understand something crucial. The most effective attacks aren't just against people or property, but against our collective willingness to gather, celebrate, and trust in public spaces. Have you ever felt responsible for protecting others during moments when the whole world was watching? Have you ever sensed that someone was planning to use shared joy and celebration as cover for unthinkable harm?